It was a calm, pleasant night. A cool breeze slipped through the open windows, and the full moon glowed in the sky, casting a silver light over the quiet neighborhood. Everything felt peaceful. Just hours ago, kids were laughing and playing in the streets, their voices echoing in my mind. Now, a deep silence blanketed the area, a silence that felt heavier than it should. I sat on the couch with a book, but my mind wasn't on the pages. The window was open, letting in fresh air and the sound of crickets. Everything seemed normal, or so I thought. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move in the house across the street. It was an old place with brick walls and locked wooden windows, empty for years. People whispered stories about it. Some said the owner vanished long ago. Others claimed it was cursed. I never paid attention to those tales until that night. A shadow moved on the wall of the neighbor's yard. It was tall and thin, like a person, but its movements were wrong, unnatural, as if its joints didn't work right. I stood up and stepped closer to the window. My heart beat a little faster, but I told myself it was probably just the moonlight playing tricks with the trees. Then the shadow moved again, gliding toward the house's windows like it was chasing something. I pressed my hand against the glass, trying to see better. Suddenly, a sound cut through the night, a low, eerie moan coming from the yard. Goosebumps prickled my skin. The yard's lights, which had been on moments ago, flickered and went dark, plunging everything into blackness. I held my breath, staring into the void. I couldn't see anything, but I felt something out there, something that didn't belong. Seconds later, another sound came, a scratching, like nails dragging across a wall. It sounded like something was trying to climb. My heart pounded. I quietly closed the window, pulled the curtains, and stood still, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, I gathered the courage to step outside. A few neighbors were in the street, whispering. I asked what was going on. One said they'd heard strange noises from the old house last night. Another said they'd checked the house at dawn and found the gate half open, but no one was inside. Everyone agreed the house was empty, abandoned for years. When I mentioned the shadow I'd seen, their faces changed. One hesitated and said, "Maybe you saw wrong, or maybe..." They didn't finish. All day I couldn't stop thinking about that shadow. I tried to push it out of my mind, but it stuck. I decided to investigate. I didn't want to believe the rumors, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. The next night, I grabbed a flashlight and my phone, set to record, and headed to the house. My heart raced, but I told myself I just needed to be sure. I pushed the gate. It creaked open. The yard was dark, smelling of damp earth. I swept the flashlight over the walls and windows. Nothing seemed off, except for deep scratches on the wall, fresh and jagged. I moved to the front door. The handle wouldn't budge. It was locked. But when I aimed the flashlight at the ground, my breath caught. Muddy footprints led to the door, then vanished, as if whoever made them disappeared mid-step. I started recording with my phone. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt I had to keep going. Then I heard it again, the same moan from the night before, louder now, coming from inside the house. I swung the flashlight toward the windows. For a split second, I saw the shadow again, tall and unnatural, standing still, like it was watching me. My heart stopped. The shadow slid to the left and vanished. Without thinking, I ran back to my house, locked the door, and checked the footage. What I saw was worse than what I'd felt. The shadow didn't just move, it seemed to press its face against the window for a fraction of a second. A face with no human features. For days I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but I couldn't. Every night I heard faint scratching and moans from the house. The neighbors grew uneasy, too. One mentioned someone disappearing in that house years ago. Never found. Another said they'd seen strange lights flickering in the windows, like someone wandering with a candle. I dug deeper, looking into old town records. What I found chilled me. The house once belonged to a family that vanished mysteriously. No trace of them was ever found, except for some odd notes discovered in the basement. The notes were filled with gibberish and drawings of tall shadows. The police back then thought it was the work of a madman and closed the case. But what stood out was that every few years, someone reported seeing a shadow or hearing noises in the house. All the reports had one thing in common. The shadow appeared on nights with a full moon. I was now certain something was in that house. Something not human, not explainable. I decided to go back, this time prepared. I brought a night vision camera, a voice recorder, and a motion sensor. I wanted proof, not just for me, but to show others. On the next full moon, I returned. The air felt heavier, like something was waiting. I set up in the yard, turning on the camera and placing the motion sensor by the door. The recorder sat on the ground. Everything was still, but the air felt thick. Suddenly, the motion sensor beeped wildly. My heart jumped. I aimed the camera at the door. Nothing. Then the moan came again, loud and clear, from somewhere below. It sounded like it was coming from the basement. Every instinct screamed to run, but I pushed the door. The lock was broken, as if something had forced it open from inside. The house was pitch black, smelling strongly of mold. The wooden stairs to the basement creaked under my feet. The night vision camera cast everything in a ghostly green. When I reached the basement, I froze. The walls were covered in hundreds of deep scratches, like something had clawed at them for years. In the center of the room stood a large, dusty old mirror. But what stopped my heart wasn't my reflection. It was the shadow behind me, tall and unnatural, moving in ways that defied time. I spun the camera around, but nothing was there. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was closer. A deep moan echoed nearby, and the mirror cracked. I screamed and bolted up the stairs. In the yard, the motion sensor was going crazy, and the recorder was knocked over. I grabbed everything and ran home. The footage was worse than I'd feared. The shadow wasn't just in the mirror. It seemed to lean toward the camera in a few frames. The recorder caught not just moans, but whispers, words I couldn't understand, like they came from another world. I showed the footage to a few neighbors. They were horrified and said the house should be torn down. But when we went to the authorities, they said the house was protected and couldn't be touched. Since that night, I've stayed away from the house. But on every full moon, I see the shadow from my window. Sometimes it feels like it's watching me. The noises haven't stopped, and sometimes I'd sense something walking in the streets, something only I notice. I still don't know what that shadow is, but one thing I'm sure of, that house isn't empty. Something lives there, waiting. The cool autumn breeze flowed through the open windows, carrying the scent of fresh wooden furniture. I had just moved into this house a few days ago. The neighborhood was quiet, with stone-paved streets and trees whose leaves danced in the wind. My house was small but cozy, a single-story home with white walls and a wooden ceiling that glowed under the moonlight. Everything felt perfect. The neighbors were kind, though I hadn't talked to them much. A middle-aged couple lived next door, always greeting me with a smile, and sometimes leaving a basket of fruit at my doorstep. Mornings started with the sound of birds, and nights ended with a book in my hand by the window. Life was simple and peaceful, exactly what I had always wanted. I felt like I had finally found a place to call home. I arranged my things carefully, a shelf full of old books, a small desk for writing, and an old radio that sometimes played nostalgic songs. Everything was in its place. What I loved most was the silence of the nights. The neighborhood was so calm it felt like time stood still. The only sound was the wind rustling the tree branches. Or so I thought. About a week after moving in, I heard it for the first time. It was past midnight, and I was lying on the couch with a book I could barely focus on. My eyes were heavy when a sound came from above. Footsteps, soft and careful, like someone walking on a wooden floor. Tap, 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 steady but not too loud. At first, I thought it was my imagination. My house was on the top floor. There was no above, just the roof and the sky. Maybe it was the wind or a branch hitting the ceiling. I put the book down and just stared at the ceiling. The sound lasted a few seconds, then stopped. Silence returned, but it felt heavier now. I got up, went to the kitchen for a glass of water, and when I came back, the sound started again. This time, it was clearer. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone was walking right above me with steps that were neither rushed nor careless. I laughed at myself. Probably just tired. Or maybe a bird on the roof. I closed the window and went to bed, but that night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something was off in the house. Like someone or something was watching me. The next morning, with sunlight streaming through the windows, everything seemed normal. I forgot about the footsteps and went about my day. But the next night, the sound came again. Louder this time, like the steps were heavier. I looked at the ceiling and tried to think logically. Maybe it was the water pipes or the wooden ceiling shrinking in the cold. But something about the sound wasn't right. It was too human. A few nights later, I couldn't ignore the sound anymore. Every night, just after midnight, the footsteps started. Sometimes they lasted a few seconds, sometimes minutes. One night, I even heard something being dragged across the floor, like a chair being moved. I decided to investigate. Maybe the neighbors knew something. In the morning, I went to the house next door. I rang the bell, but no one answered. I thought they might be asleep or out. I tried again in the afternoon. Still no answer. It was strange because one of them was always home. I visited another neighbor down the street, an old man who always sat on his porch reading a newspaper. "Excuse me, have you seen the neighbors next to me? They haven't been home for days." The old man looked at me for a moment, like he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. "Them? Yeah, I think they went on a trip a few days ago. Said they'd be gone for a while." "A trip? When did they leave?" "Maybe a week ago." "Why do you ask?" I smiled and said, "Just curious." But when I got home, I felt uneasy. If they left a week ago, where were these sounds coming from? Their house was right next to mine, wall to wall. Maybe the noise was coming from their place, not my ceiling. That night, when the footsteps started again, I decided to get closer. I went to the wall that separated my house from theirs. My heart was pounding, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I pressed my ear against the wall. At first, I only heard the footsteps, soft and steady. But then, I heard something else. A whisper. Quiet, but clear. Like someone was speaking on the other side of the wall, right where I stood. "Why are you looking?" My breath caught in my throat. I jumped back and stared at the wall. The sound stopped, but the silence was scarier than anything. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was my imagination. maybe the wind or something else. But those words, that whisper, were too real. After that night, I didn't dare go near the wall again. The footsteps continued every night. Sometimes, with whispers I couldn't make out. Days were normal, but nights felt like my house turned into something else. Even my old radio started turning on by itself, playing static or switching stations like someone was controlling it. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the backyard, where the wall connected to the neighbor's house. The air was cold, and a thick fog covered the street. I looked at their house. Everything seemed normal, but their windows were dark, like no one had ever lived there. Suddenly, I heard a sound from inside their house. Not footsteps or whispers, but a scratching noise, like nails on wood. I pointed my flashlight at the window, but saw nothing. My heart was racing so fast I thought it would stop. I turned to go back inside, but at that moment, something moved in the window. A shadow, not clear, but real enough to make my skin crawl. I ran back to my house and locked the door. I stayed up all night, with every light on. In the morning, I called the police and said I thought someone was in the neighbor's house. They came, searched the place, but found nothing. They said there was no sign of a break-in, and the house was empty. One of the officers even joked, "Maybe your house is haunted." His joke wasn't funny. A few days later, I decided to dig deeper. I went to the local library and read about the history of the neighborhood. What I found chilled me to the bone. Years ago, a house in this area had burned down, exactly where the neighbor's house now stood. In that fire, a family disappeared. Their bodies were never found, and rumors spread about strange noises coming from the land. Years later, a new house was built there, but no one stayed long. When I got home, I was certain something was wrong with that house, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave. I had spent all my savings on this place. The nights got worse. Now it wasn't just footsteps and whispers. Sometimes I heard a faint laugh from the wall. One night, I even saw a shadow on my bedroom wall, like someone was standing next to me. I decided to make one last effort. I bought a small camera and set it up facing the shared wall to record at night. In the morning, I watched the footage with trembling hands. Most of it was dark, but at one point, I saw something. A blurry shape, not quite human, seemed to come out of the wall and look at the camera. Then the camera shut off. It's been months since I moved into this house, but I'm not the same person anymore. I threw away the camera and never dared record again. The sounds still come every night, but I've learned to ignore them, or at least pretend to. The neighbors came back, but they never talked about their trip. Sometimes they give me strange looks, like they know something I don't. I still don't know where the sounds come from. Maybe the house is really haunted. Maybe something is hiding in the walls. Or maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But one thing I know for sure, I'll never listen to that wall again. It was a warm day, the kind where the sun shone softly, and a cool breeze made the leaves dance. The smell of wildflowers filled the air, and the sound of kids laughing as they rode their bikes echoed through the neighborhood. Our little area was quiet and cozy, with old houses, brick walls, and small gardens that bloomed every spring. Everyone knew each other here. People left their doors unlocked at night, and neighbors chatted over fences. It felt like time moved slower in this place. For a few months, the old house at the end of the street had been empty. It was a 2-story place with cracked walls and dusty windows. The garden was overgrown with weeds, and the wooden door looked like it might fall apart. Everyone said it was a shame such a house was left abandoned. Then one morning, as I pulled back the kitchen curtains, I saw a van parked in front of the house, loaded with furniture. A man stepped out of the van. He was tall, with grayish hair that was a bit messy. He wore simple clothes, a gray shirt and dark pants. There was a strange calmness about him, like he was never in a hurry. A few neighbors, always eager to chat, went over to him. From a distance, I could see him smiling and talking, sometimes nodding or laughing. I don't know what they said, but when the neighbors came back, they looked happy. A few days later, the old house came to life. The windows were clean, colorful curtains hung inside, and the garden was now full of roses and jasmine. A wooden swing appeared in the yard, and the kids loved it. Every evening, they'd gather around, laughing and eating ice cream. One day, I even saw the new neighbor bring juice and cookies for them. Everyone liked him. They said he was kind, a great neighbor. Even I, who was usually cautious about strangers, started to warm up to him. Every night, at exactly 9 o'clock, the lights in his house turned on. Sometimes, soft music floated out from the windows, old songs that reminded you of forgotten memories. The smell of home-cooked food often drifted into the street, making you hungry. One evening, as I walked home from work, I saw him sitting on the porch, reading a book under the glow of an old lamp. I nodded and smiled. He smiled back warmly. Everything felt perfect, like our neighborhood was now complete. A few weeks passed and things seemed fine, but one night as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I felt uneasy. It was past midnight and the neighborhood was silent as always. My window was open and a cool breeze moved the curtains. Suddenly I heard a sound. It was faint, like someone whispering under their breath. It sounded like a prayer or an old chant, but I couldn't make out the words. The sound came from the neighbor's house. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I got up, drank a glass of water, and told myself it was just the wind or maybe a cat. But when I lay back down, the sound came again. This time, it was clearer, like a repeating melody from far away. It wasn't loud or annoying, but it carried a heavy feeling, like something in the air had changed. I got up and went to the window. I pulled the curtain aside and looked at the house across the street. The lights were off, but a shadow moved behind the basement window. My heart beat faster. Who was awake in the basement at this hour? I tried to think logically. Maybe the neighbor was fixing something, building a shelf, or organizing his stuff. But why so quietly? Why so strangely? I couldn't sleep that night. When the sun rose and light filled the street, I thought maybe it was all in my head. But as I made my coffee, a bad feeling lingered. The next morning, a nosy neighbor came by. She asked if I'd heard anything last night. I didn't want to say anything at first, but when she mentioned she'd seen something too, I told her about the sound. She said she'd been up late and noticed the basement light on until almost dawn. She even thought she saw two shadows behind the window. We both felt uneasy, but agreed not to tell anyone else. We didn't want to start rumors. Maybe it was just one weird night. A few days later, the neighborhood didn't feel the same. It was like a dark cloud had settled over everything. People stayed inside more. Kids stopped playing on the swing, and even the stray cats seemed to disappear. The strange sounds at night got worse. Now, I wasn't the only one hearing them. Others talked about the whispers, too. One neighbor said he heard footsteps in the neighbor's garden while walking his dog, but when he looked, no one was there. Another claimed she saw a shadow behind the basement window, but when she got closer, it vanished. One night, I decided to investigate. I couldn't ignore the sounds anymore. After midnight, when everything was quiet, I grabbed a flashlight and slipped outside. The air was cold, and a thin mist hung over the street. My heart was racing, but I told myself I just wanted a quick look. When I reached the neighbor's house, everything seemed normal. The lights were off, the curtains were drawn, and it was silent. But when I glanced at the basement window, I thought I saw something move. Not a shadow or a person, just a feeling, like something was watching me. I hurried back home and locked the door. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like something was in that house that shouldn't be. The next morning, when another neighbor said she'd heard the whispers again, we decided we had to do something. Someone suggested calling the police, but others said we needed proof first. We agreed to keep watch for a few more nights. A few days later, early in the morning, before the sun was fully up, police sirens filled the air. Several police cars screeched to a stop in front of the neighbor's house. Officers rushed inside, and soon yellow tape went up around the property. Neighbors came out of their houses, eyes wide with fear and questions. The news spread fast. They'd found remains in the basement. Not one or two, but an entire family. Skeletons, dressed in decayed clothes with old belongings scattered around them. The police said they were likely from years ago, when a family had vanished from this neighborhood. No one ever found them, and people assumed they'd moved away or gotten lost. But now it was clear they'd never left the house. The basement, always locked and ignored, had held their secret. But what shocked everyone most was the neighbor. The one we'd all talked to. The one who brought juice for the kids and read on the porch. He didn't exist. The police searched everywhere, from the basement to the attic. There was no trace of him. No name, no documents, not even a fingerprint. It was like he'd never been there. The furniture in the house was old, untouched for years. Even the book I'd seen him reading was a decayed copy of a novel from decades ago. No one could explain how someone so real could leave no trace. The only clue was strange. A neighbor's security camera showed that every night, at exactly 3 a.m, a light in the empty house turned off. Not on and off, just off. Like an invisible light no one could see was being switched. The police checked the camera, but had no explanation. They said it might be a glitch, but we all knew that was just an excuse. Months have passed since then. The house is still sealed, and no one dares go near it. The garden is overgrown again. The curtains are dusty, and the swing has rotted under rain and sun. But the story has spread. People from other neighborhoods come to see the house, like it's some creepy attraction. Some say the neighbor was a ghost, one of the people who died in the basement. Others think he was a killer, hiding for years and returning to cover his tracks. A few even claim they still hear whispers, especially around 3 a.m. I can't live here comfortably anymore. Every night before bed, I glance at the house across the street. I half expect to see a shadow or a light that shouldn't be there. I haven't seen anything yet, but the feeling never leaves. It's like something, or someone, is still there, waiting, watching. One sleepless night, I checked the neighbor's security footage again. At 3 a.m, my heart stopped. The light turned off, as always. But for a split second, a shadow moved behind the basement window. It wasn't clear, but it was there. I'm sure now that house will never be at peace. Whatever its secret is, it's still alive. And every night, at 3 o'clock, a light that shouldn't be on turns off.